wind howls across the flat and desolate prairies of Illinois, carrying secrets that have been buried for more than a century within the frozen soil. In the year 1877, the small town of Watseka became the epicenter of a chilling supernatural event that defied all medical and scientific explanation of the Victorian era. It was a time when the veil between the living and the dead felt incredibly thin, and the spiritualist movement was sweeping across the nation like a fever. The story of the Watseka Wonder is not merely a tale of ghosts, but a disturbing chronicle of a stolen identity and a soul displaced. It begins with a darkness that descended upon a young girl named Lurancy Vennum, who would soon become the vessel for something long dead. The atmosphere in Watseka was heavy with unspoken fears, as whispers of the occult traveled from neighbor to neighbor under the cover of night. Lurancy Vennum was a typical teenager of the late 19th century, living a quiet and unassuming life with her family, until the shadows began to creep into her mind. In the summer of 1877, she began to suffer from strange and terrifying fits that left her body contorted and her mind shattered. She would fall into a catatonic state where her pulse would slow to a near stop, and her skin would turn as cold as marble. During these episodes, she spoke in voices that were not her own, describing distant lands and interacting with spirits that no one else could see. Her parents, Thomas and Lorinda Vennum, watched in helpless horror as their daughter slipped further away from reality. The local physicians were baffled by her condition and could offer no remedy other than the grim suggestion of committing her to the state insane asylum in Peoria. The prospect of the asylum was a death sentence in those days, as patients were often subjected to cruel treatments and left to rot in squalor. Thomas Vennum was desperate to save his child from such a fate, but the demonic episodes were growing more violent and frequent. Lurancy would scream of beings hovering near the ceiling, and she claimed to be tormented by entities that wanted to drag her soul into the abyss. The community of Watseka watched with a mixture of pity and superstitious dread as the Vennum house became a place of shadow and fear. It was during this moment of absolute despair that a man named Mary Roff stepped out of the darkness and into the lives of the Vennum family. Mary Roff was a wealthy and respected citizen, but he carried a heavy burden of grief that had haunted him for 12 long years. Mary Roff had a daughter named Mary Roff, who had died in an asylum years prior, after suffering from conditions remarkably similar to those of Lurancy. Mary had been a troubled soul prone to violent outbursts and strange visions before her untimely death at the tender age of 18. When Mary Roff heard the rumors of the Vennum girl and her strange affliction, he felt a chill run down his spine as he recognized the symptoms of the spiritual malady that had claimed his own child. He was a devout spiritualist who believed that the dead could communicate with the living, and he was convinced that Lurancy was not insane, but rather possessed by spirits seeking a conduit. He approached Thomas Vennum with a plea to delay the asylum commitment and allow him to bring a spiritualist physician to examine the girl. The physician was Dr. E.W. Stevens, a man well versed in the mysteries of the unseen world and the psychology of the spirit. Thomas Vennum, beaten down by exhaustion and fear, agreed to the meeting as a last resort to save his daughter. On a cold afternoon, Dr. Stevens and Mary Roff entered the Vennum residence, where they found Lurancy sitting in a rigid chair with a vacant stare that seemed to look right through them. As they began to speak, the girl hissed and recoiled, her voice dropping an octave into a guttural growl that chilled the blood of everyone in the room. She claimed to be an old woman named Katrina, and then shifted into the persona of a young man who had committed suicide. The air in the room grew heavy and stagnant as Dr. Stevens attempted to reason with the entities inhabiting the body of the young girl. Dr. Stevens spoke with authority, demanding that the darker spirits leave the vessel and allow a benevolent spirit to take control to heal the girl. The entity possessing Lurancy laughed mockingly, but eventually the girl fell into a deep and sudden trance. When she spoke again, her voice was soft and melancholic, completely different from the harsh tones of the previous entities. She claimed she was willing to leave, but that another spirit was needed to hold the body while Lurancy's soul went away to heal. It was then that the name Mary Roff was spoken into the silence of the room. The entity claimed that Mary Roff was present and willing to take the place of Lurancy to save her from the asylum. Mary Roff stood trembling in the corner as he heard the name of his dead daughter spoken by the stranger. The transition that followed was one of the most documented and disturbing events in the history of paranormal research. On the first day of February in 1878, Lurancy Vennum woke up, but she was no longer Lurancy Vennum. She looked at her parents with total lack of recognition, treating them as polite strangers who had intruded upon her morning. She demanded to go home, and when asked where home was, she described the Roff residence in intricate detail. She asked for her box of letters and her old dresses, items that Lurancy Vennum had never seen or known about. The Vennum family was heartbroken yet terrified as they realized their daughter was gone, and a stranger was looking out from behind her eyes. The girl, who now called herself Mary Roff, became agitated and distressed by being in the Vennum house, which she claimed she did not know. To test the validity of the possession and to calm the girl, it was decided that she would be allowed to visit the Roff home. As they walked through the streets of Watseka, the girl bypassed the path Lurancy would have taken and instead navigated the route Mary Roff had used 12 years prior. She pointed out houses that had not existed when Mary was alive and asked about old neighbors who had long since moved away or died. The level of detail was impossible for Lurancy to have known, as the Vennum family had only moved to Watseka recently and had no prior connection to the Roff family or their history. Upon arriving at the Roff residence, the girl ran into the arms of Watseka Roff and his wife, calling them Pa and Ma with an emotional intensity that brought tears to their eyes. She immediately recognized objects in the house, including a velvet headdress she had worn during her final days. She asked about an old friend named Nervy, giving details about their childhood that only the real Mary could have known. The Roff family was stunned as they watched this stranger move through their home with the familiarity of a daughter who had never left. For Watseka and his wife, it was a miracle. But for the rest of Watseka, it was a macabre spectacle that defied religious and scientific understanding. The girl, now fully living as Mary Roff, moved into the Roff household, leaving the grieving Vennum family behind. She settled into her new life with frightening ease, displaying habits and mannerisms that were identical to the deceased Mary. She knew exactly where the silverware was kept and how to open a tricky drawer in the writing desk that had been stuck for years. She would sit for hours recounting memories of her childhood, remembering specific conversations and events that had happened decades ago. Dr. Stevens visited regularly to document the case, and he noted that the physical appearance of the girl seemed to change subtly to match the memory of Mary. Her eyes seemed different, and her demeanor shifted from the shy awkwardness of Lurancy to the bold and sometimes erratic behavior of Mary. One of the most chilling aspects of the possession was the way the girl interacted with the Roff family members, whom she had technically never met. She recognized her brother instantly when he came to visit, even though he lived in a different town, and Lurancy had never seen him. She teased him about a prank they had played on a neighbor years ago, a secret that only the two siblings shared. The accuracy of these memories convinced even the most skeptical observers that something truly extraordinary was taking place. The girl showed no knowledge of Lurancy Vennum or her family, and when the Vennums came to visit, she treated them with polite indifference, as if they were merely guests calling on the Roff family. Weeks turned into months, and the girl continued to live as Mary Roff, creating a surreal domestic situation in the heart of Illinois. She would often fall into trances where she claimed to be visiting the spirit world to check on the soul of Lurancy. She reported that Lurancy was healing and was being cared for by other spirits, including the original Mary Roff, who was guiding the process from the other side. This meta commentary on the possession added a layer of complexity that fascinated spiritualists around the world. The story of the Watseka Wonder spread through newspapers and journals, drawing attention from researchers who were eager to prove or disprove the existence of life after death. However, the presence of Mary Roff was not without its darker undertones. The girl would sometimes exhibit the same mood swings and irritability that the real Mary had suffered from before her death. She would complain of pains in her head and beg her father to comfort her, just as Mary had done during her final illness. The Roffs were forced to relive the trauma of their daughter's suffering, but they were so grateful to have her back that they endured the emotional roller coaster. It was a haunting reenactment of the past, played out in the body of a stranger. The town of Watseka remained divided, with some believing it was a miracle of God, and others whispering of witchcraft and devilry. As the month of May approached, the girl began to speak of her impending departure. She told the Roff family that her time on Earth was limited, and that she would soon have to return to the spirit realm. She explained that Lurancy was almost fully healed and would need her body back to live out her natural life. The impending separation cast a gloom over the Roff household, as they realized they were about to lose their daughter for a second time. The girl spent her final days visiting with friends and saying long emotional goodbyes to the neighbors she had reconnected with. She gave specific instructions on how to handle the transition and what to tell Lurancy when she returned. On the 21st day of May in 1878, the final moments of the possession arrived. The girl sat in the parlor, surrounded by the Roff family, holding onto them tightly as she wept. She told them that the angels were calling her and that she could not stay any longer. She kissed her parents and thanked them for allowing her to come back for a short while. Then she closed her eyes, and her body went limp, sinking into a deep sleep. The room was silent save for the ticking of the clock and the suppressed sobs of the Roff family. They watched and waited for the sign that their daughter was gone and that the stranger would return. When the girl opened her eyes again, the change was instantaneous and jarring. She looked around the room with wide, terrified eyes and pulled away from Mrs. Roff, asking where she was. The confidence and familiarity of Mary Roff were gone, replaced by the confusion and fear of Lurancy Vennum. She did not know why she was in the Roff house or how she had gotten there. She asked for her own mother and father and begged to go home. The Roff family, heartbroken but true to their word, explained gently that she had been ill and that they had been caring for her. They immediately sent for Thomas Vennum, who came rushing to retrieve his daughter. Lurancy Vennum returned to her family, completely cured of the fits and the madness that had plagued her. She had no memory of the months she had spent living as Mary Roff. To her, it was as if she had fallen asleep in February and woken up in May with a large gap in her life. The cure was hailed as a triumph of spiritualism, and Dr. Stevens published a book detailing the case titled The Watseka Wonder. The story became a cornerstone of spiritualist literature, cited as irrefutable proof of spirit possession and the survival of personality after death. But for the people involved, the reality was far more complex and emotionally scarring. The Roff family was left with a silence in their home that was louder than before. They had touched the hand of their dead child and heard her voice, only to have her ripped away again by the laws of nature. Mary Roff remained a staunch believer until his dying day, convinced that he had been granted a divine favor. Lurancy went on to live a relatively normal life, eventually marrying and moving to Kansas. But the shadow of the possession followed her. She was always looked upon with a mixture of awe and suspicion by those who knew her history. People would stare at her, trying to catch a glimpse of the other soul that had once inhabited her frame. Skeptics over the years have proposed many theories to explain the Watseka Wonder, ranging from multiple personality disorder to elaborate fraud. Some suggested that Lurancy had subconsciously absorbed information about the Roff family from local gossip, and that her trance was a hysterical reaction to the threat of the asylum. Others believed that the Roff family, in their grief, projected their memories onto the girl, coaching her knowingly or unknowingly. Yet none of these theories could fully explain the uncanny accuracy of the private details she knew, or the physical changes that witnesses swore they saw. The case remains one of the few instances of possession where the intent was benevolent, and the outcome was a cure rather than a tragedy. The house where these events took place has long since been altered by time, but the legend remains woven into the fabric of Watseka. Walking the streets today, one can almost imagine the figure of a young girl walking with the gait of an old soul, pointing out landmarks that no longer exist. The story challenges our understanding of identity and memory, raising the terrifying question of who we really are. If a soul can be displaced and replaced so easily, then the boundaries of the self are far more fragile than we dare to admit. The Watseka Wonder forces us to confront the possibility that we are merely tenants in our own bodies, vulnerable to eviction by forces we cannot see. As night falls over the prairie, the wind still whispers through the tall grass, carrying the echoes of two families bound together by a ghost. The legacy of Lurancy Vennum and Mary Roff is a testament to the enduring power of grief and the desperate need to believe that death is not the end. Whether it was a miracle, a madness, or a manipulation, the emotional truth of the experience was undeniably real for those who lived it. They looked into the abyss of the unknown, and the abyss looked back, wearing the face of a lost child. And in the dark corners of history, the Watseka Wonder remains a haunting enigma, a puzzle with missing pieces that have been lost to the grave. The psychological toll on Lurancy after the event is often overlooked in the retelling of the ghost story. While she was deemed cured, she had to reintegrate into a life she had abandoned for months. She had to learn to live with the knowledge that her body had been used as a vessel for the dead. The whispers of the townfolk never truly ceased, and she carried the label of the spirit girl for the rest of her days. It is a heavy burden to bear, being the living proof of a world that most people only fear in their nightmares. Her silence on the matter in her later years speaks volumes about the trauma of the experience. Dr. Stevens, the man who orchestrated the entire affair, remains a controversial figure in the narrative. Was he a pioneer of psychological therapy, using the belief system of the patient to effect a cure? Or was he a manipulator exploiting a vulnerable family? His detailed records provide the only window into the daily life of the possessed girl, but they are colored by his own bias and belief in spiritualism. He championed the case as a victory for his cause, but the ethical implications of encouraging a child to assume the identity of a dead woman are deeply troubling by modern standards. He walked a fine line between healer and puppeteer in a drama that captivated the nation. The concept of benevolent possession is rare in Western folklore, which is dominated by tales of demons and exorcisms. The Watseka case stands out because the invading spirit was welcomed and treated with love. This inversion of the classic horror trope makes it even more unsettling in a way. It suggests that the dead are not always malevolent monsters, but can be sorrowful entities clinging to the warmth of life. It humanizes the ghost, making the supernatural feel uncomfortably close to the natural. It blurs the line between a haunting and a homecoming. Even today, paranormal investigators and historians revisit the Watseka Wonder, trying to find a crack in the story or a rational explanation that fits all the facts. They scrutinize the census records and the letters looking for discrepancies. But the core of the mystery remains solid. The sheer number of witnesses and the public nature of the event make it difficult to dismiss as a mere hallucination. It was a mass event, a communal drama that played out on the stage of a small Midwestern town. The truth is likely buried somewhere between the skepticism of science and the blind faith of the spiritualists. Imagine the nights in the Roff house during that strange spring of 1878. The family gathering in the parlor, listening to a girl who looked like a stranger but spoke with the voice of their beloved dead. The flickering candlelight casting long shadows on the walls as they indulged in the impossible. It was a seance that never ended, a necromancy of love and loss. The air must have been thick with an electric tension, a mix of joy and underlying terror. Every moment was precious because they knew it was borrowed time. The departure of Mary Roff was as significant as her arrival, marking the end of the experiment. When she left, she did not go quietly, but with a tearful farewell that cemented the emotional reality of the bond. The grief of the Roff family was renewed, a fresh wound, opened by the loss of the same child for the second time. It is a cruelty of fate to be given hope only to have it snatched away again. The house returned to being a mausoleum of memories, the laughter of the ghost girl fading into the silence of the past. Lurancy Vennum lived until the year 1900, and 52, carrying the secret of that winter within her until the end. She died in a world that had moved on from the spiritualist craze of the Victorian era, a world of atomic bombs and television. Yet the story of her youth remained frozen in time, a Gothic masterpiece of American history. She never sought fame or fortune from her story, preferring the quiet obscurity of a housewife. Perhaps she knew that some doors once opened should never be touched again. The lingering dread of the Watseka Wonder lies not in jump scares or gore, but in the quiet realization of our own mortality. It asks us to consider what happens when the biology of the brain fails and the consciousness is left adrift. It challenges the sanctity of the individual soul, suggesting that we are fungible and replaceable. If Mary Roff could simply step into Lurancy Vennum, then who is to say that we are safe in our own skins? The story is a psychological horror that gnaws at the foundation of human identity. So if you ever find yourself driving through the flat cornfields of Illinois, near the town of Watseka, remember the girl who died twice, and the girl who lived to tell the tale. Remember the desperate father who bargained with the spirit world, and the doctor who documented the impossible. The wind still blows cold across the plains, and if you listen closely, you might hear the faint whisper of a name lost to time. It is a reminder that the past is never truly dead. It is just waiting for the right vessel to speak again.